Good evening and welcome to Sport at Prime. I'm very excited to have a chat to our guest this evening, a man who needs absolutely no introduction, but certainly will receive one. The president of SAFA, Dr. Danny Jordaan. Thank you for your time tonight, Danny. Wonderful to have you on. Your very first time, in fact, on Newsroom Africa. So thank you and good evening to your debut performance here tonight.
Oh, I'm happy. The first time that I'm in your studio. And, of course, to talk about football when there is no football.
Well, that's a very difficult conversation, and one would imagine that this then should be a difficult interview, but let's try and unpack how and why you and many other people are working towards trying to get football back. I imagine the first question all the fans will be wanting to know is, Mr. President, when can we expect any form of football? I know that there's plenty of discussions with yourselves and, of course, the PSL, with the health department, with FIFA as well. So try and bring us up to speed. When can South African fans expect some form of local football to return?
You know, we always said the players' health is first. Football is part of the entertainment industry. And in the entertainment industry, players must be medically and physically fit and healthy. And therefore, the coronavirus has threatened that environment. And so we have to wait until we get to a position where a reasonably safe environment can be provided. We received a letter from FIFA on the 17th of March from Fatma Samora, who is the Secretary General of FIFA. And also then 2 weeks later, I had a conversation and a meeting with FIFA. Well, it's a virtual meeting where they wanted an update on where we are, South Africa, and when can we look to a restart of the season. We've also been clear to them that between domestic leagues and football and international football, we want the league to start first. And it's obvious. Bafana players come from the league. So you cannot play international matches before you start domestic matches. So we have to work together with the PSL. We have submitted our position on when we see the season to start. We gave that copy to the government and to FIFA and to PSL and indicated to all of them that our final position would be a product. Once we receive the input or the position of PSL, we then have a joint liaison meeting. We put all the documents on the table, discuss all the issues, and then we'll probably have a single position as to when South African football can start. And the minister was quite clear. When he goes to the cabinet, he can't have two positions for when football must start. All other codes of sport has a single position. So we have to consolidate and have a single report that we give to all those who have an interest and must know as to what are our positions. I think that if we receive the report, we have not received it yet from the PSL. As soon as we have that report, probably early next week, we'll have the joint liaison meeting, finalize a consolidated report, and submit it.
What is your desired date? You said that you've obviously submitted this. If I were to ask you to rub your magic ball and provide me with a hopeful date that fans might be able to expect, what are we looking at? Are we looking at 3 months, 2 months, a couple of weeks? We see the Bundesliga returning mid-May. Yeah. So will world pressure be able to accelerate that date at all?
Well, it depends on what happens in our country. Unfortunately, at this time, the infection rate is on the increase. The death rate, number of deaths increases. And so we have to ask the question, is it safe? Is the environment safe? And if we play in empty stadiums or behind closed doors, then what are the measures that we have to take? If teams must travel, what are the measures that we have to take? And I think this will be part of our discussion with the PSL. And so we will have a single position that we will then forward to the government and to FIFA.
How damaging has this been for SAFA and for football in South Africa? We know that it's happening across the world, so it's almost a blanket approach, but we know that, you know, our wallets perhaps are not the size of some European federations. So from a South African point of view, the fact that we have, you know, lost qualifiers, lost our league domestically, from a SAFA perspective, how damaging has COVID-19 been thus far?
No, it's absolutely been devastating. You know, you talk about the European leagues. In Europe, the clubs and the national associations would have 5 revenue streams. Prize money in the UEFA Champions League and other competitions are quite substantial. The Champions League would be 1.6 billion rand if you play all the matches and you win. The final alone is about 88 million. So it's a substantial revenue for the clubs and federations, even the National League and the European leagues that they play, Nations League. So it's substantial. Second huge revenue in Europe is match day revenue. It comes from hospitality, ticketing, and all the services that provide on match day. And the third revenue, of course, is the merchandising. And we see the strong merchandising program that these teams have, where you can even here in our country buy Barcelona, Real Madrid, Liverpool, Tottenham Hotspurs, and so on. So those are 3 huge revenues. The last 2, of course, is the sponsorship, commercial partners, and broadcasting. And those are the 2 revenues that we have in South Africa. Now, if you look at where we sit now, we have an economy that's going into depression. We have huge unemployment, very difficulty, SAA and other companies, and SAA is our sponsor. Sasol is our sponsor. And they all have serious problems. SABC is our broadcast partner. They have serious problems. And then you have the other problem that most of the sponsorship revenue for football comes from the retail industry. And the retail industry is also under pressure, like South African breweries. And so we have to rethink and find a different model. And lastly, the biggest threat for South Africa is that there's only one pay channel, SuperSport. And SuperSport carries between 50 and 60% of revenue for most federations. And rugby and cricket and PSL, of course, are huge beneficiaries. So if anything happens in that space, you can imagine the problems that we have in South Africa.
Some difficult times ahead. I'll ask you to have a sip of tea and take a quick break. We'll be back with Danny Jordaan, the president of SAFA, right after this. It's 4:05 News at Prime and Sport at Prime with the SAFA president back right after this. The Sport at Prime, we are in conversation exclusively with the SAFA president, Danny Jordaan, joining us live in studio tonight here on 4:05. Mr. Jordaan, thank you for your time again. We do appreciate it. We were speaking about finances earlier on and just how big a role they play in sports, and we know this. We've seen a trend over the last few weeks, in fact, that a lot of the PSL clubs are now starting to make some pay cuts. And whilst I know that this is not a conversation around the PSL, in fact, but as the mother body as SAFA, is there any form of assistance that can be provided? Because the PSL grants are still being paid out. Yet, seemingly, and perhaps puzzlingly, some might say, these teams are still struggling to pay salaries. Is there an obligation, a responsibility from the mother body to provide assistance to these clubs?
No, there's no responsibility, but clearly there's an interest, and we need to work together in that space because, remember, we get our players for national teams from the PSL clubs, and therefore it's in our interest that PSL clubs must thrive. And even those who are not making money, they are in business to make money, and so they also want to make money. So what we have to do is to look at new models, not just for football, but for funding of sport. In this country, from the lotteries, from betting, we have to look at all options so that we can get the funding necessary. Of course, from the government side also it's difficult to get funding. And if you're going to play behind closed doors, you have no revenue from the gate. So there is an immediate and huge impact. But of course, if you look at what happened in the English FA when they were thinking of playing behind closed doors, of course, there, Liverpool is 25 points ahead of Manchester City. And the Liverpool fans need 2 more matches to win the league, and they want those matches. But they said they cannot just look at playing the matches behind closed doors, because there's a displacement of fans. If, for example, Mamelodi Sundowns play Pirates in an empty stadium at FNB, must ask the question, are those fans going to stay at home? Or are they going somewhere to watch that match? And where is that somewhere? And what's going to happen in those taverns and other areas where they'll congregate and watch the match? Second thing is, and that's what they were talking about Liverpool, if Liverpool wins the league, they expect in Liverpool between 70 and 80,000 fans will go onto the streets. And they're not supposed to go onto the streets. So stay at home. And are they going to get the fans to stay at home? If Chiefs or Pirates or Sundowns win the league, will the fans stay at home? What then happens? So there are a lot of things that you have to consider in dealing with an issue in its entirety and not just look at one aspect. The health aspect, of course, is important. Sanitizing the stadiums, not allowing players to share one bottle of water, wearing masks, or the people on the bench wear masks, and all other safety and health measures must be in place. So these are the issues that we will discuss. We have 2 opinions from 2 doctors, and we will sit down with all the medical advisors of the government to find a safe environment for the matches to commence.
Even if you remove the fans, there are still 11 football players from a team, or in fact the entire squad makes it bigger, but by the time you bring in the technical staff, the clubs, etc., the physios, you are probably looking at a group of 30 plus people per side that still need to play these matches. So the one solution that's been offered is to play at a neutral venue, which would make the sanitizing far easier. That said, though, would it be feasible to, firstly, I imagine in a difficult perspective, pick one stadium that would serve as the neutral ground, for that stadium to continuously be sanitized, match in and match out, and then some would argue that it perhaps wouldn't be too fair for some of the traveling fans if the stadium is up in Johannesburg and a team from Pietermaritzburg is forced to come and play here on what would be a very busy calendar. Does it seem like too many technicalities to get right, or is it something that just requires some very intelligent people to sit down and logistically work out?
No, it's clearly a complex issue. And you can see that Belgium and the Netherlands has, in fact, given up. Because, as you know, we have given up, let's just close the season. And that has its own problems. What do you do then? What about promotion? What about relegation? UEFA was discussing something that they call sporting merit, that determine the places on sporting merit. But even that is problematic to decide which teams will then qualify to go into the UEFA Champions League on sporting merit on a season that was not complete. So, I'm sorry, but there's no easy answers here, and we have to find it. That is why we said we need to sit down with the PSL to find all these answers, because when we submit a comprehensive report to government and to FIFA, at least they will see that we've applied our minds. We put the safety of players first. We are concerned about the economic pressure on the clubs, and these clubs must also be sustained. So how do we do that and balance that with having the players safe?
Mr. Jordaan, it's been relatively well documented in the past that there's been some tension between the PSL and SAFA. I wonder if you maybe can try and enlighten us as to how and why perhaps some of those conflicts have arisen, and why is it seemingly that the two bodies are at times at loggerheads with each other?
Well, the reality is that in some senses we are competitors. We compete in the market space. We are competing. Instead of one proposal for the broadcasters, we have two proposals for the broadcasters. Instead of one proposal to South African breweries, we have two. And we have to talk about those things as the revenue base for football and for sport in this country is going to shrink. Should we have then still in the marketing environment two competing entities? We have to work together, and these are some of the issues that I think that we just have to deal with.
How would you describe your relationship with Dr. Ivan Khoza?
Well, he always call me I'm stubborn, and I say that he's stubborn. Look, we've worked together in the World Cup, in the bidding process, and I think we have a focus on what is in the interest of the country. But, of course, as all human beings, for example, on when do we start football, we have different views. And the government and the Minister Mtetwas asked us to sit down and bring and consolidate one single view. And FIFA expects that, government expects that. And that is what we must do. It's our obligation to do so.
Does that suggest that because you two are competitors in a sense, as you say, does that suggest that the relationship will never fully be a fluid, happy, friendly one, that there will always be some tension, some pull and push?
Yeah, it's a difficult relationship because, you know, for example, we need the players to play for Bafana. The club needs the players to win points in the league. The national coach would want the players to stay for another 5 days. The coaches of the club's teams will say, no, that player must come back, or no, you cannot have this player. And it goes right down to our under-23 teams, our under-20 teams. So, yes, there are...
Is there a final say, though? Do you, as the mother body, eventually then have the right to make that call, or is it very much the club has a right as well? Like, where does the power with SAFA stop?
No, we can legislate, but it's not in our interests, as I see it. You see, if a player is unwilling, why do you force him to play for your club? Is he going to give you the performance? So it must be through discussion, negotiation, and agreement, so that the player is not worried that he's playing for Bafana, what will happen when I get back to the club, or he plays in the club and, well, my national coach take me. So it is our responsibility as people in the leadership of South African football to deal with those difficult moments. And by the way, it's not just South African clubs. We have similar problems with European clubs. You saw with Percy Tau and even players in Portugal, like Luther Singh, where we were one match away playing in the qualification for the Tokyo Olympics in Egypt. And his team didn't want him to play, he wanted to go back. And so it's sometimes tough, and we have to be fighting with them too, to say, no, we want to qualify for the Tokyo Olympics. We want this player, we need this player. So it is, I don't know when the solution will come, but it's a contest between club and country has been there, not just in South Africa, but all over the world, same problem.
Oh, Mr. Jordaan, you and I could continue speaking football for hours on end, I have no doubts. And I wonder you've been a public figure for many, many years, and you'll know that claims are made against public figures all the time, and you'll also know that you generally have had very few opportunities, in fact, to respond to some of these claims. I wanted to know if you would like to use this opportunity to perhaps respond to some claims that were made by Jennifer Ferguson back in 2018, if you'd like to use the platform to respond to that.
I denied then, and I still deny today, I have done nothing wrong, that woman. And I hope that the law enforcement will clear this issue. It's a difficult issue, but I'm clear. I've done nothing wrong. I'm innocent, and I will look her in the face. And for the smearing of my name, I want consequences. As you may know, I did open a case against Jennifer and some football officials for a defamation case. So that is where I am with that. My conscience is clear. I am not I don't even fight with men. Why would I be aggressive towards women? It's not my nature. But it's difficult, and it was clear for a political outcome, as who is the president of SAFA. This thing was engineered, and I hope that would be laid to rest. But there are other things. They say, for example, I couldn't travel overseas. I traveled to 150 destinations in the last 3 years. We never said no, but we see him there in London, Paris, New York. The media never corrected that thing. And this thing started very strangely after I completed the World Cup. And the World Cup was celebrated in the world as one of the best. And, of course, our country and our continent celebrated. Now, in our country, unfortunately, at that point, you must remember, you have a lot of supporters, but many enemies that will start using a campaign in the media to attempt to destroy your name and everything else that you... There are people who forget. And sometimes it's difficult, but as you say, we are leaders. We must stand our ground and face whoever comes along. And I've always been prepared to do that. I work in the interest of South African football. South African football and SAFA carries the hopes and dreams of 3 million South Africans. And that constituency base are the unemployed, the poor, the sick, the living in drug-infested areas. And the only thing that they carry in their heart is a hope of being a Bafana player. And that is what we must work for. So where are we now? We have 65 young players in Europe. We have 20 women players in Europe. It's never been achieved in South African football. Women players playing in the best teams all over the world. We have a Fun Valley, which is a technical center, worth 150 million. We have a headquarters called SAFA House, 70 million. Which other federation has such infrastructure and assets? Our junior teams, under 17 women, went to the World Cup. Under 17 men went to the World Cup. Under 20 men's team went to 2 consecutive World Cups. Under 23 men went to 2 consecutive Olympics in Rio and now in Tokyo. Banyana was in the final of AFCON for the first time. Banyana qualified for their first World Cup in France. And you must know there are 54 countries, only 3 go. Same with the under-20 team, only 3 go. Same with under 17. We were 3 in all of those tournaments out of 54 countries. Our team, Bafana, went to the quarterfinal, beating Egypt in Egypt. It was a magic. And I sat in the VIP box with the Egyptian government and ministers right after the match. They went to a room, and I could hear them shouting and screaming. And after that, one general came out and announced the whole executive of Egypt football has been dismissed. Well, they can do it. Fortunately, we are not in that space. But you can see how we are regarded throughout the world. We're one of the biggest federations. We have done well, but for some people, we always have to deal with those issues of perception. You know, in the United States, they have a thing called fact checks. So, and maybe you should have a column here for fact checks. If there is an article on the Sunday, they check the facts and they put there, you said this untrue, this false, this lie, this untrue. Because the journalists also must be held accountable. They must be held accountable. And I think not just in football, in all other spheres. And I hope that the broadcasters will introduce what we see in the United States, a dedicated program called fact-checking. And let the people know what is true and not true.
Well, Mr. Jordaan, I know your time is incredibly valuable, and I thank you truly for it. I appreciate more than I can say to have you come through and join us here in studio. I really do appreciate it. The SAFA president, Danny Jordaan, giving us a lot of his time this evening to speak about a whole load of factors, including COVID-19, and how football will hopefully return as quickly as possible here in South Africa.